This is the Big Shuriken 2 from Scythe. We reviewed it in a dedicated video. You can check it out at the card up there. This is the Big Shuriken 3. You can see it's a slightly beefier version. Both of these models have 5 copper heat pipes, although these are nickel plated. And apart from that, there isn't much of a difference. The fans are slightly different. We'll talk about that. And the temperature differences are noticeable. There's something substantial going on with the Big Shuriken 3 that the Big Shuriken 2 didn't already have going for it. They're both small, compact coolers, so they're not going to perform as well as, say, a Hyper 212 Evo, but for the price and considering the form factor applications, I think these are decent coolers. And right now, you can really only buy the Big Shuriken 3. The Shuriken 2 is pretty old and kind of phased out because there's no AM4 support with that cooler. Big Shuriken 3 includes AM4 support, and it's pretty much the same size. Again, we'll talk about all of that in this video. Stay tuned. Thermal Grizzly's Carbonaut pads offer peace of mind, ease of installation, and industry standard performance in a market crowded with mediocre thermal compounds. Our own testing confirms that they conduct heat appropriately and provide a safe and consistent membrane between the die or IHS and cooler. Best of all, you can grab them in several sizes and reuse them as many times as you'd like. Carbonaut pads are a peace of mind in my book, and they're very consistent, and that's why I use them for CPU testing. Check them out via the link below. So I'm gonna do something I don't typically do with reviews of this caliber, and I'm gonna mention the price of this cooler first. Big Shuriken 3 comes in at around 40 to 50 USD, somewhere in the middle currently on Newegg. I've linked it down below. If I have the Amazon link or something similar to this, I will link that down below as well, so check it out if you're interested in this form factor. Other than that though, aesthetically, you can see it has a nice black frame that wraps all the way around the heatsink, and I don't really know how I feel about this, and the nickel-plated copper pipes look okay. I actually prefer the bare copper piping. I think it's just a nice contrast to the aluminum fin stack, but I mean, it's not a big deal. In terms of sheer weight, the Big Shuriken 3 definitely weighs more, and that is perhaps a testament to this cooler's ability to absorb a bit more heat. And we do noticeably have more surface area that these fins are covering because they are longer and they are about as dense. I actually didn't check density before. I'd say, yeah, the fin density is about the same, but the fin depth, as in how far the fins reach down into the cooler, definitely close to doubled with the Big Shuriken 3. So I expect better cooling performance. I mean, that's just, the bigger the cooler, typically, the more heat it can handle. As for the two fans you get with these coolers, this is the Big Shuriken 2's fan. You can see it's very, very slim, 120mm form factor. It's a 4-pin PWM fan. This is the Big Shuriken 3's fan. It is also a PWM fan, but this one has rubber vibration mounts on both the front and back sides of this fan. You also have a dark gray tone this time around versus the straight black, so it could look better or worse depending on the color scheme of your build. And the one big catch, the one perhaps negative, especially when seen in the context of this form factor, is this fan's thickness. If I hold up the Big Shuriken 2's fan, you can see it is noticeably thinner. I would say almost maybe half a centimeter, maybe a little over half a centimeter thicker than the Big Shuriken 2's. And that doesn't sound like a lot. Like, Greg, why are you being super picky? Well, because the Big Shuriken 2 barely fit in some of my favorite ITX cases, including the Fractal Design Node 202. With this fan on the Big Shuriken 3, it won't fit. So I've got a Fractal Node 202 here. This is actually one of the previous builds I've showcased on the channel. Check it out in the card up there. I have both coolers as well, and I'm just gonna set them on top. You can see the cooler barely clears the frame, and that's why this cooler is like perfect for the Node 202. In fact, we can keep the dust filter of the Node 202 in this case, and the frame itself will actually sit against the fan's frame, but it won't interfere with the rotation of the fins at all. So it's, again, a perfect fit. Now, in the case of the Big Shuriken 3, I get nice and low, and you can see that the fan frame clearly extends past the height of the chassis. And even when we remove the dust filter in the Node 202, there's no way to secure this, right? So a solution, if you want to call it that, is to swap this fan for the Big Shuriken 2 fan. Now, it is an extremely tight fit. In fact, the Big Shuriken 3 without the fans is still slightly taller than the Shuriken 2, but if you swap the thicker fan for the Shuriken 2 fan, you can make it almost work. Again, you have to remove the dust filter and it's gonna press right against that. It might even flex just slightly, but it's better than having no support at all. So it is a shame that you have to do this to get it to work. You have to modify not just the cooler, but also the case. You have to remove the dust filter. That's a shame, but it's possible. I will say that, it's possible. So this is the big Shuriken 3 cooler with the Shuriken 2's fan installed. I'm going to, it's actually not installed, it's just kind of resting on top of it. But let's see, I'm gonna place the top of the case back on, and no issues. You can screw this in no problem, and this is without the cooler secured. So that'll lower it just slightly, but enough to where you won't have any issues with the fan's fins scraping against the chassis. So yeah, that's a bit disappointing. I mean, you hold these two coolers side by side, and in terms of height, they look to be about the same. Scythe knew that going with a fan like this was going to improve their new cooler in two regards. First off, the cooling potential, the cooling performance of the cooler in question was going to improve because this fan can displace more air per fin. This fan from the big Shuriken 2 has many more fins because the fins themselves can't be angled sharp enough to displace the same amount of air per fin. So you have to compensate by adding more fins. That increases the sound, the tone. Actually, the tone itself is a bit higher pitched than this one. This is a lower pitched sound, which I think is a bit harder for the human ear to pick up. And so yeah, it was a big trade-off basically. The cooler is definitely quieter, the big Shuriken 3 is, and the cooler is definitely a better performing cooler in terms of temperatures, but you eliminate compatibility with some very important cases, and I think that's a missed opportunity. Now let's talk about ease of installation. Big Shuriken 2 has a fairly easy install process. You have two brackets, one on each side of the cold plate. You can see we have 4 mounting points here. Typical Intel form factors are supported here, and then you have basically a bracket, a retention plate on the back side that will hold this cooler against the motherboard, against the CPU, and there are just 4 screws to secure. So really how you want to do this is put the cooler face down, flip your motherboard upside down, smush it against the cooler, and then screw in the 4 points from the back of the motherboard. And that's literally all you have to do. So secure the brackets, flip it over, screw it in from the back. There you go. The big Shuriken 3 is actually a bit more difficult to install in my opinion, but part of the reason why that's the case is because you now have AM4 support, and when you add support for both AMD and Intel into the same cooler, and I'm sure manufacturers are aware of this, I've seen many coolers that have to kind of accommodate in unique ways. You have to do some interesting things and make the process just a bit harder for the average builder to get this to work across multiple platforms. So Scythe actually did a decent job considering. You do have these 2 pre-installed screws that sit across this little retention plate on top of the cold plate, and you screw these 2 into a bracket that you secure from the back of the motherboard. The bracket itself includes a couple more steps because you do have to first off secure that to the motherboard before you mount the cooler itself. But overall, I'd say the install process, though it is a bit longer, is just as simple as the big Shuriken 2's, and of course including AM4 support now is a huge plus. Now let's talk temps. You can see 4 coolers here. Obviously the big Shuriken 3 and 2 are included, but also the Be Quiet Dark Rock Slim and the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Black Edition. With average temps in blue and max temps in orange, you can see that the Hyper 212 Evo squeaked out a win over the Be Quiet Dark Rock Slim. Just a 1 degree Celsius delta there, 73 versus 74. Average temps were pretty much the same. By the way, average temps really aren't saying much for us here, although it is more or less a baseline to indicate that there was nothing obscure about the way I was testing. So it's more or less a check for me. I wouldn't focus too much on those. Max temps though for the big Shuriken 3 reached 77 degrees Celsius, so about a 3 degree bump over the Dark Rock Slim. And then the big Shuriken 2 reached a pretty toasty 81 degrees Celsius for the exact same rig. Now, I want to encourage you not to compare these results with previous results I've posted on the channel regarding the Dark Rock Slim and the 212 Black Edition. I have a totally different setup here for these. So it's the exact same components, but the overclocks are different, the voltages are different, and I had to do that because these smaller coolers here couldn't handle the manual overclocks that we were originally pushing. Next up, we have perceived sound intensity, obviously measured in decibels. We have a sound meter now, so our results for the top 2 coolers are going to be slightly different than what you've seen in previous videos. The Dark Rock Slim idled at 35.2 decibels, 40.1 decibels under load, 42.3 for the Hyper 212 Black Edition, only slightly louder for the big Shuriken 3, 43.2, and 44 even for the big Shuriken 2. So taking into account solely the price and the performance metrics you just saw, I'd say the Big Shuriken 3 is a worthy upgrade. In fact, they're not really charging much more at all for a substantially better cooler, in my opinion. But the big issue that we have to come back to again is compatibility, because this cooler is noticeably taller, and that will restrict the use case of this cooler, especially in smaller form factor builds involving cases like the Fractal Node 202. I'll say it again just for emphasis because a lot of you were asking about that. So if you're willing to modify it just a little bit, maybe use an even slimmer fan like the one that's included in the Big Shuriken 2, then by all means the Big Shuriken 3 is a great cooler for those lower profile builds. But if I was building like a micro ATX or a full-size ATX build, then the Big Shuriken 3 obviously wouldn't be my first choice. The Hyper 212 Black Edition and the Dark Rock Slim, which the Dark Rock Slim's more expensive, but the Hyper 212 is fairly cheap, actually around 30 or 40 bucks, so cheaper than the Big Shuriken 3, is a better cooler overall. It keeps temps lower, and it also runs quieter, and in my opinion, it looks pretty sweet at the same time, especially the Black Edition. So if you're building a standard size PC, it makes no sense in my opinion to go with a Big Shuriken 3 unless for whatever reason you like those top flow coolers, but there are better top flow coolers out there. Instead, the only viable use case I see for the Big Shuriken 3 is again in the low profile builds, and when you make it taller and reduce compatibility, you're kind of counteracting the only competitive advantage you have in this space. So I really wish Scythe had lowered the height of this to where it fit, into the same cases that the Big Shuriken 2 did, because right now it's about 1 centimeter too tall, and there's really not much more you can do to modify the cases in question to make this fit. So it's unfortunate, but I can say with certainty this is a better cooler for the price. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and the conclusion is kind of weird for me to draw up because I really like it, but can you actually use it in your build? It ultimately comes down to the case you choose, the form factor, etc. But let me know what you think about it in the comments below. If you guys like this video, thumbs up, I appreciate that. Click that red subscribe button, become a member, do all those fancy things, and I will appreciate it. Be sure to check out our affiliate links for these products down below as well. It gives us a small kickback, and it all adds up, and yeah, keeps me doing what I'm doing. So thank you for that. Thanks for watching. This is Science Studio. Thanks for learning with us.